The theme for today is the impact these 5 extreme right-wingers have had on the human rights of you and I in Britain, and how they're threatening it, trying to destroy our Human Rights Act. We are very, very excited and pleased to have Professor Des Freedman here today to talk about the fight for free speech. Thank you, Des.
Thank you very much. You don't have to press anything. Okay. Thank you very much, and congratulations for occupying this space, because this is the real fight for free speech. The people who work in that building, no, let me rephrase that. The people who employ the people who work in that building tell us that they are the only people, them and their fellow billionaire proprietors, who look out for free speech, who look out for a free press. And they're the ones who are doing everything they can to shut it down and to distort what we want of a free press. They're doing everything to say that a free press should only be for those who have the money, who have the cash, who have the many tens of millions of pounds that it takes to set up and staff a newspaper, an online venture. And that's not what we understand by a free press. A free media is something that will tell us the truth, that will be independent of all the vested interests, independent of the government and the state. It will be independent of the advertisers who continue to fund them. And you'll have read what Peter Oborne did when he resigned as the chief political editor of The Telegraph, one of their competitors, just for simply pointing out the fact, just for asking the question of what happened to the coverage of the scandal of HSBC, one of the world's biggest banks, that they were refusing to tell the truth about HSBC because they didn't want to lose that money. How can the owners of our free press claim to be representing a free press when they're not going to tell us the stories about the rich and the powerful? And what is so desperate is that they're hiding the real history of a free media, because they tell us whenever we try and hold them to account, whenever we try and get them to give space to the people whose rights have been trampled on by their coverage, anytime we ask or we demand that these people should have a voice, they say that is an attack on the freedom of the press. They say that is undermining the great British traditions of a free press. So they should look at their history. They should read some of the books. They should go back into the archives and try and understand what happened 200 years ago when we did have a mass struggle for a free press. And that is, for me, a crucial element of the human rights that we should be struggling for today, which is for a genuinely free media, for genuinely free institutions to make sense of the world. If they look back 200-300 years, they would find not this wonderful mass market of a tabloid and a broadsheet. Actually, what they would find is a tiny number of very elite newsletters, and they would find all sorts of restrictions, all sorts of a clampdown on the right of ordinary people at the time to campaign for their rights. So we're talking about in the 18th century, one of the real founders of, I think, a great human rights activist for a free press was Tom Paine, who some people trying to make Tom Paine now the great revolutionary, supported the French Revolution. He was one of the most militant and bold journalists we've ever had. And when he supported the French Revolution, when he produced some of his famous pamphlets, which sold incredible numbers, those people who say, oh, we support a free press, they were the first to clamp down on him and take away the rights of publication. And he has, I should know this off by heart, so I apologise for not remembering it, but this is one of my favourite slogans of what we should be doing, of how we should be remembering the people who really did fight for a free media. And Tom Paine, back in 1792, just ahead of the French Revolution, speaking as a journalist, said that when the rich, this is a guy who was just about to be thrown in jail, when the rich plunder the poor of his rights, it becomes an example to the poor to plunder the rich of his property. Now that's the kind of spirit we should have now, because the rich defending their property were all the time trying to take away the rights of the poor to express themselves. And so what did people do? They started to organise, and you find, this isn't a great history lesson because I'm jumping 50 years, but you find with the first big mass working class movement in this country, the Chartists, you find that the struggle for a free media was at the heart of that. And what was the response of the people, again, who preached that we have a free media now? This was a government that basically made it illegal to tell the truth. They had an official press, which was the voice of the government, and they had what they called an unstamped press, which meant it was illegal to circulate your views. And what's so great is this unstamped press did really well. This is a country with, at the time, very high illiteracy, but these sold in great numbers. And remember, again, a lot of people, they weren't just buying it to read it, they bought it to give to the person who could read, who would smuggle it. You had to smuggle these illegal newspapers, like the Poor Men's Guardian was the most famous one, smuggle it around the country in networks. They used to smuggle them in coffins, in hat boxes, in anything they could get hold of to get past the official censors, and they used to read them in wherever they could, in pubs, read them in any kind of illegal gatherings. And these were the first networks of militants acting on the need for a free press. You then had, at the height of the Chartist movement, that first movement for trade unions in Britain, you had a newspaper called the Northern Star, which sold something like 50,000 copies, which at that time is an enormous circulation, again, distributed, consumed by whole groups of people around one person just reading it out. And they helped to foment one of the most important movements for democracy. There was them on one side and this growing movement, and there were the people, the Times included, telling us what the government wanted to tell us. So the idea that the rich have ever been able to protect, should ever be trusted with a free press, they need to learn their history. They need to learn what really happened, which is that people, when they have struggled for basic democratic rights, have always also struggled for the right to express themselves independently of censors. And I don't just mean the government censors saying you can or can't publish this. I mean people who work through the market, that something will be published only if it's going to make money. So yeah, you're all free to start up. In fact, we have the newspaper here. Is it the Occupied Sun? The Occupied Sun. You're free to start that up. You're probably much freer if you have the money that Murdoch and all the other media moguls have to circulate their material. And for me, that's not what I understand by a free press. A free press is one which holds power to account and doesn't just get in bed with it. A free press, a free media, is something that actually is able to be independent of any centres of power. A free press is fearless. A free press doesn't depend on the richest advertisers to keep it going. It will depend on the energy and passion and interest of the people who read and consume it. So it comes back to, this is a question of human rights now, the ability of ordinary people to tell and to read the stories about them. And I'm afraid we're here because we don't feel that that's what's being done. We know that what we're being told up until 2008 is what a great job the financial institutions of this country were doing. That was the story that we were hearing from these great protectors of free media. The BBC couldn't wait to tell us more stories about the great stock market boom. Maybe they questioned it for a couple of months afterwards in 2008, but they have never held the people to account who are responsible for devastating the lives of millions of people. The bankers, some of the academics who have told us lies about the financial system. And so the people who protect a free press, well, what are they free to do? They are free to humiliate and to target. Free to humiliate and tell lies about whole different groups of people, of refugees, of asylum seekers. Free to tell lies about anyone who wants to actually You just think about how women are represented inside something like The Sun, and yet when those people try and address this, they are just vilified and targeted once again for interfering with the freedom of the press, instead of actually standing up for the right not to be abused, not to be humiliated. So what our message, and the message that you've been taking all week, is that someone has to be held to account. This isn't about censorship, this is about empowering ordinary people to build a media that we deserve, to tell us the stories that we need, and to hold the powerful to account. Because otherwise, the stories that we're going to be told are about climate change isn't a threat. And this isn't what scientists say, it's not what the mainstream of academics say, and yet, where is that story in the newspapers? They're still not telling the truth about the financial crisis. They are not holding the powerful to account because they are the powerful. And I'll leave you with one optimistic view, and I hope I'm right in this. And the big optimistic view is it's easy to blame sometimes the readers of some, or the viewers of some of the corporate media. Because you could just say, why don't they just switch it off? Why don't they just buy the stuff that maybe we want? But I don't think it's as simple as the fact that just because you read The Sun, you believe everything in it. If you read the Times, it makes you some kind of stooge. People read things for all sorts of different reasons. Maybe they find it, they want the football in the back. Maybe they like the crossword. And that when people bother to ask the readers and the viewers what they think of the corporate priorities and they think of the corporate agendas, it is not the case they're just these brainwashed victims. What for me was very interesting over the last couple of years, when there have been these moves to try and hold some of the newspapers to account for some of the lies they've told people, and we've had this vicious onslaught from the people who run the Telegraph Group, the Mail, the Times and the Sun, when there has been a move just to introduce some degree of accountability in the face of this onslaught, some very clever person thought, why don't we do an opinion poll about this and ask the public and ask them what they read, what they think about it. And in every single newspaper, the readers of that newspaper disagreed with the priorities of their owners. All of them wanted to see independent regulation to hold the editors and proprietors to account, even in The Sun, even in the Mail. So I don't think we should be completely pessimistic about this. If we are offering an alternative, then it's not the case that people will just forever and ever accept and buy everything that goes out in The Sun. We should be trying to offer some kind of alternative through all the movements that we're part of, through the media that we produce, to try and build a media that does finally tell the stories that we need and hold the powerful to account. Thank you very much.
We were talking to someone yesterday on the other side of the barricade, and one of the questions they asked is, all right, what other things can I read? You know, I had a couple of suggestions, but you know, I'd be interested to hear what other news people are reading. I mean, one that came to mind for me was Red Pepper, for example.
Well, we could go through a long list of the stuff that is online and offline, and one of the things that the internet has allowed for is for a number of different voices just to make themselves a bit bigger. Some people tell us that, you know, the internet's going to solve our problems, and because you don't need that much money just to blog and post something, some of that's going to bring down the people who are on top of the organisations like News International and Telegraph Group. It's not as simple as that because they use the internet too. But the fact is, there are endless blogs, there are endless individuals posting who will be giving us a different view of the world. And what I think is, you know, it's up to all of us to try and get those stories out there. We are never going to have the many tens of millions of pounds that it takes to get a commercial venture going, but that's not what we're here for. What we're here for is to try and make sense of the world, of the crises that surround us. So it's just a question of going online, making sure that where there are those stories that, you know, done by some people like Nafeez Ahmed, you know, who is a very fine journalist, who is using the internet to try and hold the powerful to account. There's a lot of people like him. We should be amplifying, retweeting, printing out, distributing, giving it to the commuters at London Bridge, just trying to get that information out there. So the internet has helped us get the stories out, but it has also helped, as we know, the most well-read, if that's how you want to put it, online newspaper is the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail has gone from a newspaper which sells 2 million copies a day to a blog that is read by over 100 million people. So it's not going to be straightforward. It's just all the time telling the stories, trying to get other people to circulate the stories that we want.
Any more questions on democracy, media?
Do you think there's a problem with, you know, El Faizo, he talks about the filter bubble in terms of online content. Right, do you think there's a problem with kind of the censorship or the guardians, the editors of the internet, in terms of the algorithms that are being written to direct us to cat videos rather than important content? Yeah. And I think for me that's like a main point that's going on, and in a way like the responsibility of these programmers, their kind of own ethic and their own moral judgment is going into the programs that they're writing, which controls the way we see the internet.
In my day job I have to read quite a few of the books of the people who are telling us that algorithms, that blogs, and that the internet in general is shaking power to its very core. That the internet means that power is shifting from giant corporations and hierarchies to individuals. And they tell that story because it's convenient for them, because it will start to take, they hope, to take the heat off them and start to say that the internet is just fragmenting power. And you're so right to talk about algorithms, because we don't know what goes into an algorithm. Algorithms aren't in things that are just wake up one morning and just suddenly start to structure. No, they are programmed by individuals based on particular outcomes, and those outcomes we don't even know. So obviously a lot of it is, you know, if you're working for Google, you are building an algorithm which drives more traffic to Google, which allows you to get more advertising. But there will be other political ways of organising it, and the idea, which we've been told so many times, that the internet will get rid of gatekeepers, that you and I will all become the gatekeepers. We now have the most powerful gatekeepers in the world. Not just the Daily Mail, the editor of the Daily Mail, but groups like Google and Facebook who become these giant gatekeepers. So until we get to grips, until we open up this question of what are the algorithms for, then there's just this idea that the internet is going to set us free is one of the most distorted ways of looking at things. So we need to take back those algorithms and reprogram them, not for profit, not for the interest of the state, but to make them work for all of us.
Well, I think like that's where activism needs to like kind of explore as a new model, as a way to develop itself. If you think about the policing of activism and you think about the policing of our democracy, how do we evolve? How do we evolve our questions to penetrate a bigger audience?
The problem, we should use the algorithms to open up the algorithms. We should use the internet to challenge the internet, that's for sure. There was a couple of weeks ago the attempt by American corporations to carve up the internet into a fast and a slow lane. So a fast lane for big business and a slow lane for everyone else. That was defeated through a mass movement there, and a lot of that mass movement happened to be online. It happened to be a lot of people who were using the tools that were given online. But obviously, as I say, for every person, isolated individual who wants to use those tools for the public good, there are very powerful groups and governments who are even better equipped to use that to build up the systems of surveillance that we see around us. So it's not, you know, we have a big battle on our hands, and at the moment we know, actually thanks to old-fashioned journalism, thanks to old-fashioned good, sound, ethical, investigative journalism, we know about the systems at GCHQ which are able to construct this huge surveillance apparatus. But you know, it's going to need a lot more than us just going online, us just having some kind of new algorithm to take that kind of system apart. So we need to use everything we can, which I'm sure that's exactly what you're going to say.
A question. Can we have an example of a positive or social algorithm as opposed to a social enterprise or a company that does something useful? Actually an algorithm? Because I'm trying to understand how that would work.
Who knows about algorithms?
Any algorithm person here?
What would they be doing?
Do you want me to use this again? There is no reason why you have an algorithm which is just used to drive traffic in a particular way to build up the base of a already giant search engine so that it can monopolise advertising. Why shouldn't we have new algorithms which are about gathering together all the evidence to do with climate change so that can be distributed in the most efficient, effective, persuasive way to policymakers around the world, which keeps that issue going again and again. And all the time that when you search for something on climate change, you would get that information which we as the public need to know in terms of doing something about that issue. Why should it not be like that? The reason is because it wouldn't be good for Google's business. But you can program an algorithm in any way you want, depending on what your objective is. The trouble is that this is all about consumerism and advertising. So there are as many ways of programming algorithms for the public good as there are issues that we need to be talking about.
Cool. Any other questions?
I was just wondering, so obviously I agree with everything you're saying, but I think for me the issue stems slightly deeper because we can target people, and I suppose target isn't the right word, we can change people's perception of the media now, but for me the problem starts with the education system and with the fact that children from a very, very young age are being taught to accept what they're being fed, not to question it, and therefore that then continues into adulthood. Is there any way we can actually go about changing the views of people through adolescence whilst at schools? Obviously the education system is a hard thing to change because I feel that a lot of people they'll think when they get to university, but if people don't go to university they don't have the time to actually start to question a system. It's often a lot harder to get through to people in their 20s, 30s than it would be doing it while their views are being formed. Is there anything you think that can be done about that?
It's a great question. I mean, that's when it's not just about the media. That's about hoping and encouraging people to question anything. I mean, one of the basic principles of education should be that when you are given a piece of information, you ask a question about it. Is it true? That for me is what education is about, is that you don't take things for granted. You may agree, you may disagree, but before you accept it, you say, is there another way of looking at things? And the media is one of those institutions which we are surrounded by. After all, actually, in terms of our waking lives, we spend more time with the media overall than anything else, but we tend not to ask the questions about it, or at least we do at particular times when things start to fall apart. When things start to go wrong, people will say, why didn't we know about this? People really did question, as just one example, the government took us to war in 2003 and the run-up to the Iraq war in 2003. Parts of the media started to question it because they saw that around the country people didn't buy it. We had 2 million people on the streets. We had school students breaking out of school to try and join demonstrations because they knew that this was not a justifiable war. And even there, some of the for-profit media, for a variety of reasons, said maybe this isn't where we should be headed. And you know, you had a mainstream tabloid newspaper, the Daily Mirror, put a picture of Tony Blair with blood on his hands in front of millions of people. So sometimes things can start to change pretty quickly, but there are teachers don't wake up in the morning thinking, how am I going to sell a corporate agenda to my school students? And I think if there's ways of getting materials that we can, good critical materials to teachers, to get to students, just to understand the media around them, I think teachers would be receptive, and kids, judging from some of the kids I know, would be receptive as well. But you're right, you want to start that process of getting people to ask questions as early as possible.
Sort of free media we have, like Snooze has now gone all online. You don't get things picked up anymore. And this thing about pamphleteering and the start of the press generally, it must be feasible to get back to pamphleteering rather than, because It's easy, it's cheap. If you tell people, you know, the truth, even sometimes if they don't want to hear it, they will buy it. You know, the big issue was a magazine that's come out that's sold by homeless people all over the place. And if there can be networks like that set up, that this free news, as in, you know, can be disseminated, that'd be fantastic. Have you any ideas on that? And I've had, for a long time, because I became an activist because of one article. I read one page of one article and I got off my arse and went and did something about all the things that have been going on, that I've been thinking about. That was the key to getting me 20 odd years ago, right? So it is powerful. In fact, it was only last week when I spoke to Odgie from AWOL magazine, which was a bikers magazine, who wrote the article, and managed to thank him for writing it. I sort of got messed up with him on Facebook, and it's brilliant, you know. So while the internet has its place, can you see a future for yet another paper? When the Independent was launched, we all thought it was independent. We didn't realise it was going to have the political affiliations and party line that it has.
Pamphleteering is about your objectives. It's not about where the form of the media is. Pamphleteering, we want to take advantage of every medium that we can. The pamphleteers in the 18th century used the technology that was to hand. We now have a range of technologies and we should use all of them. But the one thing that pamphleteers, or any pamphleteers, need is a cause, is a movement. The reason that Tom Paine was particularly influential was not just because he was a great writer, though he was. It's not just because he was quite a character, which he was. It was because he was living through the most turbulent times of wars and revolutions. So he had a French Revolution and the world being turned upside down that meant that his pamphlets were selling in huge amounts, more than we could ever understand today. So it's a question, it's not about just which technology, it's about making sure that we are trying, in my opinion, to build the movements which will require the ideas, which we can then provide the ideas to through, if you want to call them pamphlets, whether they are e-pamphlets, whether they are printed on newspaper, on the back of cereal packets, I don't care. The crucial thing is that we're organised together around the issues that are important. Where there is a mass movement to defend the health service, then people will want that information, and we should provide it in any form we can, learning the lessons of, you know, over 300 years of the brilliant pamphleteers who have taken single issues, run with them in accessible, ordinary language. Now, one of the terrible things the Sun has done is to abuse the history of tabloid newspapers, as if tabloid newspapers have to be about dumbing down, about reducing women just to objects. There is a great history of tabloid newspapers in this country which is using the language of ordinary people to campaign, to present ideas, which are sometimes quite complicated ideas, in ordinary language in order to get people to change their minds. That's the tragedy of the Sun, is that they have completely wrecked that tradition. I would love to see it rediscovered. It'll be rediscovered on the back of progressive popular movements which require an accessible, and if you want to call it that, a tabloid pamphleteering media.
Can I indulge my having the microphone? One last question. Have you time for one more question? I feel the core issue here is actually about financial power. I feel the core issue here is, in every single democracy or country in the world, the rich control the media, and through the media they control their governments. And so therefore, the question is, when people like a small ultra-rich elite can buy the newspapers and own them, how do we structurally address that? Because the system we've got is these people have billions in their pockets, they come and buy it. And once they've bought it, they then hijack our democracy. Murdoch has the equivalent of 20-30 million votes. You and I can protest and crash. So I'm making that comment, but the question is, how do we deal with it? You know of any country in the world that has successfully, I know in, for example, Venezuela, Chavez tried to tackle the rich ownership of the media and was portrayed over here as him suppressing the press. Is that correct? Or do you know of maybe another country that has successfully democratized and freed the press, so it has actually had a diverse press? Is there anywhere that does it? And if there isn't, how can we do it here? And are we starting something tomorrow when we're taking direct action against Murdoch to try and actually tackle it in a different way, rather than just constantly running around like Lilliputians?
Listen, to free the media from vested interests is a huge job, and obviously will take the kind of social change that many of us may want, that's going to have to be so deep-rooted. That's what we may be trying to achieve, but it doesn't mean in the immediate future there aren't things that we can do just to start to raise these questions, because they're happening all across the world. One of the great issues that people take very seriously is about the flow of information, and if it is controlled by too few people, too connected to power, there are already movements to try and do something about this. In Argentina, the government 6 years ago thought that one of the problems of the old regime was the power that a single proprietor, Clarín, had over the people of Argentina. The Argentinian government is not a revolutionary government. It's a kind of social democratic government, but it thought that this was an unhealthy clampdown by one private company. They campaigned for a change in the law of the broadcast airwaves, that there should be 1/3 of the airways reserved for private companies, 1/3 for community groups, and 1/3 for public. That's what they won that. Now, if we raise that, the first thing that would be thrown at us is would be undermining the sanctity and the freedom of the media. We would be constraining innovation. We would be harming profitability. What that government did is say that actually this is something that belongs to the people, and it's about time we gave 1/3 of the airwaves back to the people. And they were crucified for doing this. They eventually got it through. There were appeals against this, and it's been stuck in the courts for many years. That's one of the ways of people with power undermining change. But why should we not be making those demands here? It is an absolute travesty that we don't have anti-concentration laws in this country which say that if there is a problem with monopoly in the provision of our energy, then why is that not a problem in the provision of our information systems? Why is it that we have, you know, the monopolies or oligopolies across the media? That's the kind of thing I think we should raise as an issue now, because that does ask fundamental questions about corporate control. And I think it's something that ordinary people, the people passing through London Bridge tonight, they will listen to that, because the result of a corporate concentration is when they go back into some towns in Kent, they will have lost their newspapers. Or one newspaper will have shut down, and it'll be 10 miles away. In the next town will be what is called a local newspaper, and they will not be telling the stories about that town. This is a popular issue, but it's only one if we just keep addressing the question of the impact of corporate power. So it's a question for now, but it is also a question for, you know, wider social change.